topics.
California Congressman Ed Royce is chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, just returned from meetings overseas, and welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Back to America's Newsroom, and welcome home. You were in Iraq, Jordan, and Tunisia. What do we need to understand about ISIS in the form that it has today?
Well, we met with some of the Christian refugees that you spoke to and heard the stories about their atrocities, and also the Yazidis and the Kurdish forces. And one of the points I would make is the forces, the Yazidi and Kurdish forces, are not getting the support they need from the United States with the weaponry. They're fighting with 40-year-old weapons. They need anti-tank weapons to stop these suicide vehicles. We saw one of the suicide vehicles that had been captured. It's encased in iron by ISIS with a cow in front of it. The Kurdish troops called it the Mad Max vehicle. And they said 7 of these had been driven into their lines to kill their people. The 8th one, they got a lucky shot in through the window, and that's how they'd captured the one they showed to us. I think clearly what we need to do is listen to their appeal to get them directly the weapons. I have legislation to do this. The administration needs to give them the anti-tank weapons to defeat ISIS, because ISIS is using those successes on the battlefield to recruit out of Europe and around the world.
Why would we not?
Well, I think one of the issues is there's a lot of pressure from the government in Baghdad. We were also in Baghdad. And, of course, there's this rivalry, and also the rivalry with the Turks. But the real question, if you ask the Christians or the Yazidis or the Kurdish people up there, they say, look, there's a 600-mile front. The ones doing the fighting are the Kurds. Let's arm them to push them back, and let's arm the Sunni tribes and the Yazidi men to do the fighting as well. And I think if we did that with some support from our special operations people, we could roll this thing back much more quickly. And we need to, because they're practicing on new forms of explosives that allow them to do ever more devastating.
Two more topics here now. Brussels and Paris, more arrests overnight. We have now learned at least 2 more. What did you learn about the migratory path or within these refugee camps that we need to understand?
One of the things we learned, of course, is 1 million refugees come into Europe. ISIS has a policy now of embedding, trying to embed into that. ISIS is returning those refugees, many of whom were originally coming out of Europe to train, and by putting them into the refugee population, and returning them in order for them to carry out attacks in an environment where there's so many of them that law enforcement is totally overwhelmed.
Wow.
Over 6,000 fighters came from Europe, and clearly this is the big problem right now in Brussels.
Fascinating
and
trip you just completed here. James Woolsey, meanwhile, responded to John Brennan, head of the CIA. John Brennan apparently says they will not enforce waterboarding if they're even given a command by a future president. Watch.
It's one thing for him to disagree with a policy and say that he disagrees with it or agrees with it. It's another for him to say, for John Brennan to say that he would not take an action even if he were ordered by the president to do so.
That's Woolsey with Greta from last night. What do you think of this debate?
Well, the question here is not the CIA director or the president. The question is the law. And under the NDAA, under the National Defense Authorization Act, as it was passed out of the Senate, that process has been eliminated. So what we expect is the president to use his full authority within the law in order to prosecute the war against ISIS. But in this particular case, the Senate overwhelmingly passed the legislation and included in that legislation, which is now law, a prohibition on that practice.
Welcome home.
Thank
you for your time, Chairman.
It's good to be back. Thank you, Bill.
That's some really... We don't have access to a lot of these places overseas because they're too dangerous for the networks to put their people. So to get your eyes and ears is a great asset to our viewers. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Bill.
You bet.